Little girl asked, "Can I sleep in your garage?" CEO said, "No, you belong inside." Rain had a way of telling the truth. It polished the city to glass and left nothing to hide under. No shine could disguise the weary slant of a man's shoulders or the smallness of a child's hand pressed against a wooden door. When Elias Mercer stepped out of his car in the hush between thunder, a voice rose from the darkened mouth of his garage. "Excuse me, sir, can I sleep in your garage?" Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're reading from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. The garage. Elias had never known his voice to tremble. Boardrooms bent when he spoke. Numbers obeyed. Reporters took notes in the silence between his sentences. Yet looking into that wet, worried face, hair plastered to her forehead, a backpack clutched in both arms like a life preserver, he felt something loosen in him. The garage had been his favorite room. He'd kept it despite the architect's map of glossy inefficiencies, an old concrete cave at the side of a sleek house on Sycamore Hill, where the floor still bore the oil-stain outline of a long-soled motorcycle. Sometimes, when the insomnia came like a neighbor with a key, he'd stand there and breathe in the residue of beginnings, remembering the first shipments he'd packed with his own hands. Back then, he'd promised himself he would never forget why he started, so that no one who worked for him would go cold at night. Now a child rose from behind his workbench, small enough to vanish if he blinked. 9 maybe, 10 if hunger made her smaller. "Garage," he repeated, stalling the shock. She nodded. "It's dry." "I won't touch nothin', I'll be gone in the morning." Elias swallowed. His home guard, a retired greyhound named Harper, padded forward on silent, knobby legs and sniffed the girl's knuckles. Harper's tail made a tentative circle in the air. The man he had been for years, efficient, cautious, always 3 steps ahead, lifted a phone from his pocket with muscle memory. Security, protocol. But the man he had been before that, the one with scraped knuckles and cardboard inventory dividers, stared at a trembling mouth and registered a bruise blooming like a shadow under one eye. He opened his own mouth and heard something new fall out. "No." He felt the word break and soften. "No, you belong inside." Harper sneezed like punctuation. The girl blinked up at him. Her pupils were blown wide by the night. "Inside," she said, skeptical as a small, feral thing that had learned all the wrong lessons first. "Inside." Elias stepped back, giving her the kind of space people give to miracles or animals, not wanting to frighten either. She weighed the doorway like a scale could drop and crush her. Then, with a defiant little lift of her chin, she crossed the threshold into the light of the mudroom. Chapter 2. Small warm things. There were no staff tonight. Elias had sent them home after a board meeting that tasted like rust. Everyone was in a temper about the layoffs, which were strategically necessary and humanly ruinous. He'd lost the vote, or won it, depending on which part of him he asked. The only other heart beating in the house besides his had been Harper's. The girl's shoes squelched on the tile. Her backpack, orange canvas with a fraying patch of a cat, crooked, stitched into the corner, hit the ground with a thunk that said it didn't hold much, but whatever it held was heavy. "What's your name?" Elias asked, keeping his distance. "Tess," she said, after a pause long enough to change names if she'd wanted to. "Tess Maddox." "I'm Elias," he said, swallowing the Mr. Mercer that would have made him untouchable, like the man on the bus. Her eyes cut to a framed article on the wall, one of those glossy write-ups that always made him feel as if he'd wandered into the wrong person's house. Magazine Miriam had insisted he frame it. The cover featured a photo of him in front of a warehouse, arms crossed in that permanent way men cross their arms when they are told to both soften and look like they could defend something. The one that starts things in garages. He didn't know that campaign had stuck. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Are you hungry?" She didn't answer, but her gaze landed on the bowl by the pantry where Harper's kibble waited, and her throat moved around a swallow. Elias felt a slice of shame at the gleam of stainless steel appliances, the chilled quiet of a house meant to be lived in by more than one person. "Mac and cheese," he said. It was the dish his hands remembered without searching. "And hot chocolate, if you'd like." Her chin lifted again. "If it's okay." "It's okay," he said, and pulled a pot from a drawer so quietly it sounded like a kindness. He moved around the kitchen, grateful for things that made simple sense. Water measured, heat applied, cheese yielding into heat, noodles softening into hunger. When he placed a plate before her, she watched his face for a beat, testing for a trap, and then ate the way children eat when they are alone, fast with a series of careful pauses in which listening takes precedence over swallowing. Harper lay under the table, chin on paws. The dog's ragged ears perked every time Tess's fork scraped the plate. "Where are your parents, Tess?" Elias asked, after she finished the plate and stared at it as if maybe it would conjure more through sheer desire. She stared at the condensation crawling down her milk glass. "My mom works nights sometimes," she said. Then too quickly, she worked nights. "And now, she's sleeping." The words dropped like stones. She's not here anymore." Elias felt the air leave the room. "I'm sorry." She shrugged with that tiny jerk children employ when the burden is too heavy to really tug. "You didn't do it. Is there anyone else?" he asked. "Family, friends," her mouth tightened. "There's Ron. He says he's family. He says a lot of things." Elias read the bruise again. He had learned to detect the language of silences and blue. "Is that who you're hiding from?" She pushed her hair behind her ear and left her hand there, cupped like a shell. "Just for a night," she repeated, as if she were giving him a bargain she knew he couldn't refuse. He thought of protocols again, the number for Child Protective Services glowing in the back of his mind like an emergency exit sign. The problem with emergency exits is sometimes the door leads you into a smaller fire. He could call, he could file, he could check boxes that had, in rooms far away from children, been labeled best practice. He could also look at this particular child and know that any sound of sirens would send her running into the rain again. "Just for a night," he agreed. Then he heard the word and amended it without looking at her. "Or until we find what's safe." Her shoulders lowered a fraction. "The garage still, it feels like. I don't like beds sometimes." "We can make a fort then," he said, surprising himself with the ease of it. "In the guest room, you pick the pillows. Harper will guard." Her mouth did something almost like a smile and then shut around it, as if joy too carried consequences. "Okay," she said, "but I get to sleep on the floor. We can negotiate." The humor was thin, but she let it land. They chose a room without family pictures, simply because there were no pictures at all. Elias went to open the linen closet and froze with his hand on the knob, the same way he had froze 1,000 times in this room, a deer at the edge of an old road. Inside, on the top shelf, folded and refolded for years, were pajamas no one had outgrown because no one had grown after. "Do you have any clothes I could borrow?" Tess's voice yanked him from the shelf. "Mine are wet." He freed a sweater of his, soft and rolling up to her knees like she'd borrowed a small storm cloud. When he handed it to her, her fingers brushed his electric. She carried the sweater into the bathroom and closed the door with a careful hand. That carefulness, it undid him. He sat on the edge of the bed, on top of the bedspread because he had learned to fear sheets, and pressed his palms into his eyes until the room pulsed red-black. He had not gone into that closet because if he moved those pajamas, he might dissolve into air. The bathroom door clicked open. Tess emerged with wet hair combed into a neat part, the sweater swallowing her, the hem of her t-shirt poking out like a declaration that whatever she wore, she still belonged to herself. "You okay?" She asked him in the same hard, bright tone she used on her own fear. He wasn't sure which one of them she meant. Yes, he decided to practice the truth. "No, sometimes." "Me too," she said, as if granting him membership in a club of two. They built the fort. It was, as such things always are, an excuse to create a small world where rules could be decided by the people who needed them most. They draped blankets over 2 dining room chairs he carried up. Tess was serious about architecture. "A little lower," she'd say, and he would adjust. Harper tested the integrity by circling twice and sighing into a perfect donut shape. When Tess climbed under her canvas and cotton roof, she paused, fingers curling in the blanket fringe. "Will you sit outside the door?" she asked, not looking at him. "Just for a little, not in case, just till I sleep." "I can do that," he said, and arranged his tall frame in the hall like a guard dog who had never learned how to bare his teeth. The house settled around them, the sigh of hot pipes. Rain practicing scales on the windows. Tess's breath evened out. Elias watched the ceiling as the old ache moved through him with its original velocity. He had once sat outside another door like this. The whole night had been a door. His wife Camille had been in that room, white and still beyond anything living, and their daughter Wren, 6 years old, kindergarten paper crown left on the backseat of the car, had been everywhere and then not. After the accident, he had learned exactly how many hours a floorboard could hold before splintering into screams. He had learned that grief was not a mountain you climbed, but an ocean you floated on, or failed to. The grief did not get smaller. He had grown around it, unwieldy and new, like a tree twisted to hold a shape the wind never intended. He had grown a company around it too, which was the strangest thing, how numbers could be a raft, how an empire could be built as a way to make a silence manageable. He must have slept there in the hall because he woke to the sound of Harper's nails ticking down the stairs and the soft shoof of the front door opening. He was on his feet before his brain had caught up. "Tess," he called hoarse. "Sorry," her voice floated back like a ghost trying to apologize for passing through a wall. The garage." I didn't want to break anything. He found her in the garage curled under the workbench, a pillow stolen from the guest room, her backpack for a blanket. The concrete had the night's cold still in it, but the space had warmth his spare rooms didn't. "You won't break anything," he said, leaning against the door frame because he was afraid if he stepped into the room, he'd spook the moment and it would run. "Nothing in this house breaks because someone breathes near it." She glanced at him, measuring his sincerity like you measure a bruise to see if it's spreading. He crouched and set a glass of water at the edge of her blanket. "There's a heater," he said. "I can bring it," or she shook her head. "No space heaters. Curtains catch fire." The words were flat, learned. "Okay," he said. "No space heaters." He sat on the concrete, stretched his long legs out, and let the cold soak into his bones like medicine. Harper leaned against his thigh, her weight a familiar argument for staying alive. "Elias," Tess said after a long time. "Yes, you won't call no one, not yet." He knew the answer but forced himself to pause. The pause was strange territory. Men like him made a living on decisive yesies. "Not yet," he said. "Not until we find someone who will actually help, not just shuffle, and if I do I'll tell you first." "That's a weird promise," she observed bluntly. "It's the only sort I'm any good at," he admitted. She seemed to like that answer, or at least accept it. Her breathing deepened. The rain kept knitting and unknitting itself out of the night. Elias stayed until the first ribbon of gray threaded through the windows and the cold had settled into him like a vow. Chapter 3. Paper Trail's morning was a test they passed like a team. Tess kept touching things and putting them back exactly where they were, as if the house held alarms that measured fingerprints. Elias made pancakes while Harper patrolled, ears cocked toward every silence. When Tess finished a second stack and reached for a third, she stopped mid-reach and pulled her hand back with an audible effort. "You can," Elias said. "There are many advantages to being the only two people in a house." She hesitated. "I never want to take too much," she confided, not to him exactly but to the air. "People don't like that." "Being hungry isn't taking too much," Elias said, and then, feeling the edges of a truth he needed to sharpen, "needing something isn't wrong." She stared at him in that long, adult way some children have, as if parsing not only his words but what had been done to make him say them. After a beat, she took another pancake. When they were both human again, Elias gestured toward the living room. "I have to make some calls. I'd like to check if anyone's looking for you." Her shoulders tightened. She slid her hands into her backpack's front pocket and withdrew a crumpled, wax-stained envelope. Without ceremony, she slid it toward him on the table as if it were a bill. "What's this?" he asked. "The thing you'll want to see," she said. "People always want papers. My mom kept this in her wallet. Been there long as I can remember." She said, "Only if it's the kind of trouble you can't fix by yourself." The envelope was addressed in a looping, careful hand to E. Mercer, with a drawn heart by the E, as if even the letter wanted to soften his name. No address, just his name, as if that were enough to send a thing on its way. The paper was thin from refolding. Inside, a letter written in ink that had bled where tears fell. He knew this before he read it because he recognized the warping of the paper, the way salt changes the shape of a thing without altering its words. "Dear Mr. Mercer," it began, and then under it, a scratched-out Mr., and then Elias written in careful, embarrassed print. "You told me when you gave us the money at the clinic to call if we ever needed anything big or small. I called once about the formula, and your assistant cried and said the card was still good. It made me laugh. I've never had money that has a card. I know I can't ask you for the biggest things. I know people like us are supposed to say thank you and then go away. But if I don't wake up one day, I need somebody to know that Tess was wanted. Don't let anyone tell her different. Don't let him, especially. Please don't put her back with my mother. She keeps things clean but not the right way. If you can, tell Tess about the ocean. I never got there. I thought you might read this if anyone would. I thought about leaving it on your gate, but I don't know where your gate is and it seems like a silly thing to spend bus money on." You looked me in the eye. "Not everyone does. I guess that's why I'm writing this to you. I guess that's why I'm asking. Lee set the letter down gently, the way one sets down a baby or a bomb. Tess, he said, do you know who wrote this? She nodded. My mama, Lee. Did she say why she had this? He was aware that his voice had moved a register lower, the place it went when something ancient stirred. She said you helped when I was born, like a hospital thing. And that if anything bad happened, I should find you and tell you to read the letter. She kept it in her wallet with a photo of me with birthday cake on my nose. Tess's hands went stiff as she spoke. When Ron took her bag, I took the letter. I ran. I got on a bus because I knew it went to the hill because of your face on it. My face was on the bus, he repeated, as if this detail were the strangest in a morning of strange. The city had plastered his profile on a transit campaign about jobs. He joked grimly that now even commuters would accuse him of eavesdropping. You found my house with a bus ad. And the news, she said, practical. They always show your house when you talk. Big stairs, a tree with the white flowers. I walked until I saw it was that one. He had been visible at the exact moment invisibility would have kept him safe. He felt grateful for it, dizzy with how the random clunk of gears sometimes turned out to be fate. He exhaled. Then he took a step he had avoided all morning. Tess, he said, there are people who can help, and people who will say they want to help, but they work for the people who just want the problem to stop being visible. I know the difference sometimes. I have a friend who she does the right kind of work. Tess's jaw went set. No police, she said. Not police, he promised. A lawyer, Nadia Chen. She knows how to keep a small person from getting lost in a big system. Tess eyed him. You say a lot of words. I've lived a lot of days where words kept me from drowning, he said. Will you let me make one call? She considered for the length of a dog yawn. Then she nodded once. Elias stepped into his office, which was a small room because he'd believed that keeping it small would keep his work from devouring his life. He found that work devoured life no matter the size of the mouth. He dialed Nadia, a friend by years and a lifeline by habit. She answered on the second ring. This better be good. I promised myself I would start today with an easy outrage. I have a child in my garage, he said. The sentence structure is poor, she said. That sounds kidnapping adjacent. She asked to sleep there, he said. I told her no. I told her she belonged inside. He heard the silence as she recalibrated. Go on. He told her everything, including the letter. He kept his voice steady until it was time to say the name Lei, and then his voice did something he could neither predict nor stop. Nadia was quiet through the details. When he finished, she took one breath the length of a song. Okay, she said. You were right not to call the general emergency line. The wrong person picking up can doom this faster than you think. Here, what we do. I'll come over. We'll call CPS together, but we'll call from my office so we have tapes rolling and a record of every promise. We'll ask for emergency placement with someone neutral, preferably someone you can vouch for. Do you have a family member who's licensed for foster? You do. Okay, do you have a family member who could be licensed quickly? You do, your sister Naomi. Oh, you haven't spoken since. Yeah, Elias. Her voice softened and sharpened simultaneously. Call her. Nadia, he said. Ron's a factor. His last name is Wicks. He worked at our distribution center until 6 months ago. Remember when I told you your convictions are not citations you can show in court, she said. We're going to need proof. I'll see what public record can give me. Stay put. Feed the kid. Keep your heart from improvising. My heart doesn't improvise, he said. It's improvising right now, she replied. Good, I'm on my way. He hung up and stared at his sister's name. His thumb hovered over call. He thought of the last time they'd spoken. Voices the kind you use when you know this is the conversation that changes the relationship into a ruin. Naomi had looked at him across a table the size of an island and said, I need you to say her name. He had stared at a glass of water as if it held an answer and said, I can't. Naomi had left with her jacket open and her hair unbrushed, as if she had decided to let the world have her as she was. He pressed call. Naomi answered breathless, like anyone who teaches children for a living. If this is about me switching the chairs with the beanbags, I will not defend myself to administration or older brothers. It's me, he said. The silence wasn't shock, it was calculation, how to not let him do harm. Elias, she said finally, saying his name as if it hurt her tongue a little. Are you all right? No, he said, because that had become the only answer he trusted. I have a child here, a girl. She showed up last night. She needs, could you? Do you have her right now? Naomi demanded, the teacher in her snapping to attention. Yes. You're alone? Yes. Give her the phone, Naomi said. Elias blinked. He walked into the kitchen and handed the phone to Tess. It's my sister, he said. She's very good at knowing what the right thing is when no one else does. Tess took the phone and listened. After a moment, a small sound, almost a laugh, escaped her. Okay, she said. Okay. You sound like you know what sandwiches are. She handed the phone back to Elias. She's safe, Naomi said. It wasn't a question. I'll call Ray. We'll get the guest room ready. If CPS needs a name for a potential placement, you give them mine. And Elias, yes, you did a good thing, she said, without rehearsing it. That must have hurt. He took a breath like someone who hadn't remembered they could. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said. Wait until I feed her raisin bran. Then call me a monster. Chapter 4. Between doors, Nadia arrived like weather. Quick, decisive, sensible heels that made more sound than anyone else's glances. She shook Tess's hand. She sat at the table instead of hovering. She explained the process not as a threat but as a map. Children's Services, she said, is like a giant, creaky building. If the wrong door opens, you spend months in rooms with no air. If the right door opens, you might still have to sit a while, but someone will bring a chair. My job is to pick doors and keep insisting they open. Your job is to tell me the truth, even if it's messy. Tess stared at her and then took a very small sip of hot chocolate, as if sealing a pact. Okay. They made the call from Nadia's office with a recorder running. Nadia said all the words that make the right people listen. Minor, unaccompanied, potential domestic violence, immediate safety, non-relative placement with kin like caregiver pending. The worker on the other end had a voice like winter, practical, bored, and capable of mercy. We can send an agent within the hour, the worker said. Is the child safe right now? Yes, Elias said. Who are you? I'm Elias Mercer. A pause, like the yes, another pause. We'll be there in 30 minutes. Tell them to come to my office, Nadia interjected. Not his home. We keep the child in a place where a security system does not complicate impressions. They did it the right way. And still, when the social worker arrived, it turned into a game of proving you existed. Papers produced. Letter copied. Tess's hands fisting under the table when the worker used her Sunday voice to say, "Honey, you'll come with me for a bit," and the way that sentence could convince the listener it was kindness even if it was a grab. Wait, Elias said, as Tess's eyes flashed wide and white. Naomi, he said to the worker. My sister Naomi Mercer. She can take her. She's not licensed, the worker said. She will be, Naomi said, somehow appearing in the doorway like she'd been called into being. Ray stood beside her, a tall woman whose quiet steadied the room. Naomi's hair was in a bun that had clearly lost 5 separate arguments with the day, and Elias was almost undone by that familiar sight. The worker sighed, a sound of someone who had promised themselves to go to bed early and was now being asked to understand. We can begin the process, but tonight, the child needs to be placed with a licensed family. It's policy. Then she stays with me, Elias said, instantly, before fear could talk him out of it. The worker looked at him over her glasses. It's atypical, and given your level of public attention, Nadia leaned forward. He's a public figure who has space and resources. He's also not in the habit of harming children, unless you count the joys of the supply chain. We are not requesting a formal placement. We are requesting a temporary shelter arrangement under supervision until a licensed placement is available in the network. Given the bruising, given the letter, given the potential for the non-custodial adult to be violent, we are requesting the arrangement be made in the best interest of the child. The worker rubbed her eyes. Best interest of the child, she repeated, as if the phrase could be a spell rather than a checkbox. She looked at Tess. Do you feel safe there? Tess's gaze flew to Elias' face, then to Naomi's, then to Nadia's. She nodded, small but adamant. More than in some places, she said. Elias' heart did one of those improvisations. The worker wrote, initialed, sighed again. I'll need to make a home visit this afternoon, she said to Elias. If I see 10 different assistants and a staff with trays, I'll change my mind. You'll see me and a dog who considers herself furniture, Elias said. And my sister who will be bossy about shoes, Naomi sniffed. As is right. They drove back to the house in a caravan that looked, from a tabloid distance, like something scandalous. Black cars, serious faces. Inside, it looked like a family improvising a shape for itself in a hurry. When they arrived, Harper came to the door with a deep huff that sounded like, "What did you bring?" The home visit was an exercise in performing normalcy with as few lies as possible. Elias willed his very walls to look less like a magazine spread and more like a house where one could drop a backpack anywhere and be forgiven. The worker opened cabinets as if they held secrets. She poked her head into the garage, where Tess's makeshift nest still nestled under the bench. She nodded once and wrote something that Elias hoped was a word that meant okay. "You can keep her tonight," the worker said. "We'll see where we are tomorrow." Her voice had a softness at the edges now. "We'll start Naomi's process. It'll be a sprint, not a marathon, if I can help it." "Thank you," Elias said. He meant it with a weight that pushed the words down into the floorboards. When the front door closed, Nadia exhaled like a diver breaking surface. "You bought yourself time," she said. "Use it." He nodded, which meant he was already failing. He had somewhere to be, a gala for Havenbridge, the city shelter network, where he was to give a speech about corporate responsibility and the tender math of philanthropy. He would stand and speak while his company trimmed more names from payroll. He would nod while donors pledged in amounts that would have paid 3 families rent for a year. He would go home to a child in his guest room sleeping on the floor because beds made her remember a person who didn't get up. "I have to speak tonight," he said, the words tasting like betrayal of something even as he said them. "You don't." Naomi's voice had iron in it. "Stay with her. Send your regrets. Tell them you had an emergency. It is the fundraiser for the shelters." He sounded like a hypocrite in his own ears. "Then tell them the truth," Ray said, quiet enough to make the words cut deeper. "Tell them you have a shelter in your house tonight, and ask them what they think you should do." Nadia watched him with eyes that had known him longer than anyone in the room. "Sometimes the only way to walk into a room is to burn the door behind you," she said. "Decide which door you don't need anymore." Chapter 5. Boots on the porch. He decided to go. He decided to tell the truth in a room not designed for it. He tied his tie and watched Tess watch him in the hall mirror, a study in suits and smudges. "Will you be back?" she asked, the 2 inevitable words that turn a person into a promise. "Yes," he said, "before you sleep." Naomi stood in the doorway like a sentinel. "We're here," she said, as if in case he forgot the definitions of home and inside. He kissed Harper's head because that had always been his superstition. If he acknowledged the dog, fate would remember that he had remembered love. He was halfway down the steps when a car squealed to a stop against the curb, door swinging open before the engine died. "Mercer," the voice loped across the lawn. The man who owned it moved more like a bruise than a body, big, slightly off balance in anger. He had a beard that looked like it had been grown as an argument. One eye was a little red and one knuckle was split. Boots. Boot prints always knew the shortest way to the places they shouldn't be. "Ron," Elias said, knowing before he asked. Ronald Wicks had been a forklift operator in the Mercer East Distribution Center. Elias only knew that because he read names the way some men read maps. It mattered to him to know who carried his boxes. When they closed the East Center for automation, Elias had stood on its roof and told the wind a different story than he told the cameras. Men like Ron had carried his empire on their backs for a decade, and now he asked them to carry something invisible, the promise of a future job in a different place. "You took her," Ron said. "You took what's mine." Tess's form appeared in the window, small and electric. Her jaw went hard. Naomi's hand appeared in the window too, strong on her shoulder, keeping her from being visible. "Your house is real pretty," Ron sneered, eyes scanning as if the wealth could be caught and pocketed if he looked fast enough. "Your commercials are real sad. Your money smells good, Mr. Mercer. I should have had some. They said maybe severance if I didn't shout. I should have shouted." "You were offered severance," Elias said, forcing himself not to defend his decency when the indecency of the moment was bigger. "Ron, this is not the way. I called the cops," Ron said, jabbing a finger toward the road as if his violence could summon sirens. "I told him you took a kid. That'll play nice on the news, won't it? Man in the big house with someone else's daughter. And you know what? She ain't even yours." Elias' jaw clenched. "Ron," he said, quieter, "let's not do this here. There's a process. If you want to see Tess, I want to take her home," Ron said. The word home was a threat in his mouth. "She's all I got left that isn't in a bottle." "I'm all you got left," Tess said from the window, voice trembling with a fury that had learned how to hold a fork. "Then you should have learned how to keep things, Ron." "Inside," Naomi hissed, pulling her back. Ron lunged toward the steps. Ray was between him and the door in a breath, not touching him, simply taking up space with her quiet. It's how the best people block harm, with a body that insists on occupying the path. Elias raised both hands, palms out, the universal sign for nothing up my sleeves. I'm not here to fight you, he said. There's a letter from Lee. She named me as a person to call if, Ron spat. She wrote all kinds of things when she thought paper could make a different life. It couldn't. It can, Elias said softly. It can at least be held in a judge's hands. Ron snorted. Judge. You'll buy one of those too. I don't buy people, Elias said. I hire them, I fire them. The self-loathing flared up. Sometimes I hate that more than you can imagine. You can't imagine my imagination, Ron snarled. My imagination is 3 nights of an empty bed and a pan on the stove and a paramedic who won't look me in the eye. My imagination is a door that closes easy but never opens right. Something in the man cracked. It was visible, a real splinter, like the door he described, was in his chest, and the hinge had broken under the weight of his rage. He backed away 2 steps as if he'd been unbalanced by his own honesty. Then he did the thing men do when they can't repair. He threw a fist. He connected with Elias' jaw in exactly the wrong place. It was less violence than punctuation. Elias didn't fall. Ray didn't move. Naomi inhaled like she was a storm cloud learning to be a woman. Tess's eyes went so huge they nearly hid the rest of her. Sirens. A neighbor had called. Of course they had. The police arrived with tactical sympathy and hands on holsters. It took 3 words. He hit him, an absolutely true phrase, to put Ron in handcuffs he wore like familiar bracelets. As they closed the door of the cruiser, Ron leaned toward the crack of the window and said, almost conversationally, "She'll come back. She always does." The words were not a threat exactly. They were a guarantee born of repetition. Elias rubbed his jaw with his thumb and forefinger, as if the pain could be erased by the proper executive gesture. Nadia showed up in a black suit, like a blessing you only get if you risk something first. She smiled at the police in a way that made them lean back without knowing why. She took statements. She handled things. As always, the easiest thing to do in the presence of someone so competent was to allow oneself to be useless. "Are you still going to give that speech?" Naomi asked him once the blue lights had left the neighborhood hollow. There was no judgment in her tone, only a stopwatch. He touched his jaw. He thought of a room where he would be introduced with words like visionary and leader, and the boy inside of him, the one who used to hide under tables at Thanksgiving, laughed once, sharp as a cracked plate. "Yes," he said, "but it won't be the speech they expect." Chapter 6, The Fall That Felt Like Flight. The ballroom smelled like lilies and new money. The chandeliers looked like marriages between gravity and hope. Elias stood backstage and watched donors arrive in gowns that had a hard time bending at the waist. He could feel the bruise on his jaw blooming under the makeup assistant had insisted on. He thought, briefly and absurdly, of Tess asleep on a bedroom floor under a blanket because beds felt like traps. He felt something in his chest stand up and walk toward the light. When they said his name, the applause was politely expensive. A night like this paid for 3 new shelter beds, while one of his warehouses could hold 2,000 pallets of cereal boxes and still have room for a forklift ballet. He stepped to the podium and moved the mic down an inch, not because it needed moving, but because speakers always move microphones when they are about to tell the truth. "Tonight," he began, and the first word carried the shape of the rest. "I'm supposed to tell you a story about responsibility from a comfortable distance. I'm supposed to count the number of beds your generosity made possible, and I will. I'm supposed to thank you for coming closer to a problem most of us spend our days avoiding. I do thank you. But a child knocked on my door last night. She asked to sleep in my garage." He heard, distantly, the murmurs, the camera phones lifting like a flock. "I told her no. I told her she belonged inside, and I meant my house, but I also meant my life." He watched the room shift under him, a herd of deer catching a scent. "I run a company that started in a garage. I am the businessman version of a bedtime story you tell to coax investors. The truth is, I have spent the last decade making the outside smaller because my inside felt so broken that I couldn't put anyone in it without worrying it would injure them. This week, we laid people off. I can tell you why that made sense in a strategy meeting. It did. I can tell you that I cried on the roof of the distribution center when the lights went out and nobody saw. I can tell you that tears don't pay a person's rent. I came here tonight to ask you for money. I still am, but I'm going to ask for something else. Stop imagining that generosity is a room you can visit when you want to feel like a better version of yourself. Make it your address. Stop believing children belong in garages because you don't know what else to do with them. Make the inside bigger, messier, more expensive. We should all be spending more on the fire that is burning down our neighbors' houses. He let the quiet lengthen into a discomfort that might bloom into action. He told one victory story. Ray and Naomi had insisted, indignation needs a timeline, and then made the ask. He asked for twice as much as they'd anticipated him asking for. A few faces tightened in financial muscle spasms. A few loosened. A woman in pearls wrote something down with a trembling hand that looked like hope. And then he did the unpredictable thing. I can't be the CEO you need me to be, and also the person I intend to be after last night, he said. Tonight I'm resigning. A gasp like a dropped tray. I'm moving my title to a different part of my life. I'm going to work for the inside. And I'm going to keep the promises my company made to its people in ways that cost me more and make you proud of me less. The host laughed nervously because that is what hosts do when a speech escapes its leash. Elias stepped away from the podium. It felt like falling and also like flight. He walked past a row of men shifting their cufflinks as if jewelry could fix a man who jumped. Backstage, Nadia stared at him as if he'd just decided to donate his kidney to a stranger live on television. You're sure, she said, because she was always the last door checked before the leap. I am, he said, and knew it in the ring in his jaw and the ache in his chest that felt less like grief than like a muscle remembering how to work. Chapter 7. The system has a map of its own the next day. The papers did their job. They called him savior and reckless in the same breath. People who liked him yesterday liked him harder. People who had been waiting to dislike him found their moment. Ron's arrest became a rumor, then a fact, then a cause for a union to hold signs that said in block capitals, Uncle Sam takes your JOBS, Mr. Mercer takes your KIDS. Reality disappeared into headline font. The hearing came fast. Nadia, wreathed in legal competence, ushered them through the metal detectors and into a courtroom where every sound echoed as if it had been chosen for its music. The judge, the Honorable Marisol Vega, wore a bun that said she did her own hair even on days like this, and a face that said she was good at saying no to people who forgot no was a word. Nadia made a case for temporary guardianship. She held up Lee's letter like scripture. She told the story of the knock at the door and the line that gave this story its title. Ron's lawyer, a woman with sleeves rolled up to her elbows, did her best with a client who kept trying to stand when silence made his rage too tight. She painted Ron as a man undone by loss who had not asked for his life to be structured by a catastrophe. In the hallway, Elias saw the way Tess watched the courtroom door, as if it were the mouth of a beast that could decide to either swallow her or spit her into a different life. Naomi sat on the bench with Tess's hand in hers. Ray stood behind them like a guard. Elias stood because his legs refused to obey. Judge Vega returned with a ruling that had the sound of pragmatism. Placement will continue under CPS supervision, she said. Mr. Mercer, you are not licensed to take this child. Ms. Naomi Mercer and Ms. Ray Hargreaves, your license application will be expedited. Mr. Wicks, until there is proof of sobriety and an environment that meets the standard for a safe placement, you will have supervised visitation only. What about me? Tess asked, standing quickly as if a sitting child couldn't be heard. Her voice, so small and so certain, held the first sting of a leadership that would get her into rooms she hadn't been invited to. Do I get to say anything? It's my life. Judge Vega paused. It is a powerful thing to make a judge stop speaking. You do, she said. You do not get to choose everything because that isn't how this works and that isn't how any of our lives work. But you get to say how you feel. You get to tell me what you're afraid of. Tess swallowed. I'm afraid of boots, she said. I'm afraid of stoves. I'm afraid if I sleep in too soft a bed, I won't wake up. I'm afraid if I go with him, he'll say it was my fault again. I'm afraid of the ocean, 'cause I never saw it and I don't know if it's big or too big. I'm not afraid of them. She pointed at Naomi and Ray. Then, after a beat longer that held Elias' breath hostage, I'm not afraid of him, the rich one, because he cries like a person and makes pancakes wrong. Elias laughed, a scandal in court. Judge Vega wrote something and then looked up. I can't place you with Mr. Mercer right now, she said. I can, however, designate supervised contact while we fast walk Ms. Mercer's application. Mr. Wicks, you will attend counseling. You will accept unannounced visits. You will not drink. If you violate any of these, supervised visits will be suspended. Ron nodded like someone who knows what it means to see a door and imagine a way through it, even if you've never used a handle in your life. The door closed behind them, and Tess sat on the courthouse step with a sigh older than she was. I didn't get to choose, she muttered. No one ever does, not all the way, Naomi said, squeezing her hand. Except the ocean, Tess said, picking up a leaf and ripping it half and then half again. It always gets to be itself. We'll take you, Elias heard his mouth say. He hadn't planned the words. We'll go, he said again, as if promising more loudly made him more reliable. Chapter 8. Letters like Rope Naomi's license was rushed with the speed of people who had been near a story in a newspaper and wanted to be near its resolution. Still, it was a week of the in-between. The week contained implements, forms, shots, home safety kits that made Ray, a carpenter, roll her eyes and then install everything correctly, because doing it right was how she taught love. CPS placed Tess in a foster home across town with a woman named Dolers who had exactly 300 plastic storage containers and a laugh like a church bell. Tess called the containers soldiers and the laugh a shelter. Dolers had seen enough children follow her hands with their eyes to know not to make promises that had expiration dates. She let Tess sleep under the kitchen table with Harper's blanket, which Elias dropped off like contraband, and listened to the kid breathe as if breath could be counted like coins. Elias was banned from seeing Tess until the first supervised visit to avoid undue attachment. Undue, he thought, as if there were such a thing as the right amount of attachment for a child who had run from a house on fire. He sent letters instead, as if rope could be made of ink. Dear Tess, he wrote, printing neatly even though he usually wrote like a doctor, we found a beach. It's small and not fancy. I've never heard the ocean say the same thing twice. It says hello in 100 languages. It says stay if you listen long enough. I'm learning. P.S. Harper misses you, but she's very brave about it and just sighs a lot. She wrote back on paper with pineapples printed along the borders that Dolers provided like magic. Dear Elias, she wrote, I don't like pineapple on pizza. I like it on paper. Dolers makes me macaroni with peas in it. I pick the peas out, but I don't tell her. Don't tell her. The ocean looks too big in my head. I'm practicing with the sink. I put my face in and try to breathe, but you shouldn't breathe in water. That's what I learned today. P.S. Tell Harper I miss her too. I bet she sighed on your pants and now they smell like dogs and you went to a meeting like that. He laughed so hard tears came like guests who'd waited for years to be invited. He wrote again. They sent letters back and forth like soldiers, like lanterns, like birds who refused to learn boundaries. Ray took Naomi to buy a small bed for their guest room with a frame that didn't look like a trap. They set it low to the ground. They strung a canopy that made the whole thing a fort. Naomi cried when they screwed in the last bracket and denied crying 5 minutes later as if denial could put the tears back. You okay? Ray asked, wiping a streak of sawdust from Naomi's cheek with her thumb. No, Naomi said. Yes, it's going to hurt anyway, so I might as well do something good with the hurting. Chapter 9. Visits. The visitation center was a room designed to hold explosions. The furniture was unbreakable by design and ugly to discourage making a home in it. Toys with rounded corners lived in bins with labels. A woman with gray hair and a stare that could stop a running child in hour 6 of sugar sat at a desk and marked every entrance and exit as if saving them in a ledger. Ron arrived first with a shirt that wasn't dirty and a look like he'd shaved his face to apologize for what his hands had done. He had a new sobriety chip in his pocket and the temptation to throw it already curling like smoke around his fingers. He sat. He stared at his boots. He took them off. The supervisor raised an eyebrow. Boots are scary, he said, half embarrassed, half defiant. If this helps, Tess entered with Dolers like a general and a general's softest soldier. She froze at the door and then took 3 steps into the room and glanced at the boots like a mathematician measuring angles. Ron stood and did not approach. Hey, kid, he said, voice so careful with its edges that it wasn't sharp enough to cut anything. You got taller, Tess stared. You got a haircut, she said finally. Yeah, who did it, she asked. My parole, he stopped himself. My friend's cousin. It's crooked, she said. They both breathed. The supervisor watched like a woman who knew that sometimes telling the truth about a crooked haircut was the best possible version of mercy. Ron sat. Tess sat, a long way away. They spent 20 minutes assembling a puzzle silently. He didn't reach to fix any of her pieces. She didn't look at him continuously, only in little, quick darts. Elias watched from behind a one-way mirror with Naomi and Ray and Nadia. He didn't want to watch. He couldn't leave. He loves her, Naomi murmured, a little disgusted to find relief lodged under the observation. He doesn't know how, Nadia said, but that isn't the same thing as not. On the 3rd visit, Ron cried. It was a weird sound, like something boiling in a tin cup. It scandalized him. He didn't hide it. I told her, he said to the carpet. I told her it was her fault, the stove, because I didn't know what to do with my hands and my mouth and the police and all those big lights. I told a kid that her mother died because she warmed soup. He looked up at Tess with a face that had no defense left. It wasn't your fault, Tess. You hear me? It was. It was mine. All of it. It was me and the bottle and my too bad brain. It was the lights that went out and the lights that went on. It was never you. Tess's mouth wobbled. You said I was too loud and that's why she was tired and then she didn't wake up. I was wrong, Ron said simply. I was so wrong I don't know how I didn't sink into the floorboards and never come back up. Truth loosened something in the air. Elias felt it move. He set his palm on the glass, a childish gesture. He couldn't fix this, couldn't buy it, couldn't stand between everyone and their consequences. He could only be one more adult in a room trying not to make the wrong small shape for a child to live in. Chapter 10. The Choice Naomi's license came through on a Thursday afternoon when the sky decided to practice being August in May. CPS called Elias first, not because he was the responsible adult, but because he answered calls with a speed known to make bureaucracies fall in love with you. Placement approved, the worker said, and he could hear, faintly, a smile behind the professionalism. She can move in tomorrow. The paperwork will chase her. Elias stood in his kitchen, his heart doing an animal dance against his ribs. He texted Naomi 17 exclamation points and got back a single period and a line of capitals. Wait TILSHES here. It was a while since anyone had told him to wait in a way that felt like a hug. They drove to Dollar's house with boxes and a large plant Naomi insisted every child should have, because kids love watering anything that will not collapse if you love it wrong. Dollar's hugged Tess and then Elias and then Harper, which made the dog sneeze and the humans laugh. Naomi made pancakes that evening, peas hidden because she had not yet learned the code. Tess peered at her plate, raised one eyebrow at Elias across the table, and extracted the peas with the methodical precision of a surgeon, lining them up like little planets. I have to be honest, she announced. I like you, but this is a mortal sin. Ray clutched her heart. I have been judged by a child. You will be again, Naomi said. Get used to it. They set up the room together. The bed looked less like a trap now. Harper hopped up and then down, as if to demonstrate that the mattress could bear weight and still forgive you. Do you miss your own kid? Tess asked Ellen, because kids see ghosts in other people's rooms, even when you hide the photos. Elias paused, the question landing square in the place he had kept stiff out of necessity. He measured his breath, reminding it to be the length of a sentence you can finish. Every day, he said. He said it with no hedges. Saying it out loud did not make the grief larger. It let it breathe. Her name was Wren. She loved cranes. He made a paper crane and set it on the dresser, surprised at his own hand's muscle memory. I kept thinking if I didn't say her name, I could contain the hurt, but it turned out the hurt was smarter than me. It got out anyway, so now I say her name and sometimes it hurts less. Tess sat on the floor and pulled her backpack into her lap. I think moms' names are like ocean, she said. You can't say it right unless you get wet. She produced a shell, pink and white, and chipped on one edge. Dollar says she got this at the beach. She said I could take it. Maybe when we go, if we go, you can find one and we can say Lay and Wren and see if the water makes it easier. That's a plan, Elias said, and felt the future tug at him gently. Ron, for his part, did not go quietly into the theory of loss. He struggled and he fought and he went to meetings and he sat on his hands and sometimes he broke his own rules and came to the next supervised visit crying like a man who knew he was losing. And then he made a choice. He asked to meet Elias outside of the visit center, and they sat on the curb like two men waiting for a bus that would never arrive. You're a prick, Ron said conversationally, in the way serious men sometimes use the wrong word when they are building a bridge to another man. But you're a prick who listens. She doesn't look scared when she looks at you. She looks mad, but that's different. A kid should be allowed to be mad. She should, Elias agreed. I can't do it, Ron said, looking at a crack in the concrete and not at the man who would bear the consequences of his decision. I want to more than I've wanted anything, but I can't do it like she needs. If I try to keep her, I'll kill what's left that's not broken. I can't do that. He swallowed. I talked to a man who's worse than me, and he said I could make what they call a relinquishment. It sounds like something a knight does in a fairy story. It ain't. It's a form. I want to sign it. For her. Not for you. Not for a picture. For her. Elias felt his breath leave and then turn around and come back like a friend who had thought about getting off the train in a different neighborhood and came home anyway. "We will take care of her," he said. "Your name, if you want, doesn't have to be a ghost." Ron laughed without joy. "My name can be a road she doesn't have to walk on. That's enough." It wasn't that easy, of course. There were more forms than the word form deserves. There were visits with a social worker who had opinions about wall paint and how it could damage a child's sense of self if the color was too adult. There were nights when Tess woke with a scream that had no spaces between it, and Elias learned the exact way to hold a small, hot, furious person who thought the world had chosen not to touch her, without making her feel trapped. There were days when Naomi's restraint sat in the room like an extra person. She wanted to adopt. She wanted to be the mother she had been refused by a different judge years ago, when a baby went home to a cousin who learned how to mother slowly and beautifully, and without her. She wanted, but she chose to be an aunt, the way some wanting is also a choice. And then there was the day they drove to the ocean. Epilogue. Inside, they chose a stretch of coastline that rated low on tourist lists and high in the category of places where the wind speaks first. Elias parked the car too straight. Naomi rolled her eyes and parked crooked beside him because it felt like a good omen. Ray carried a cooler that seemed to weigh less when she touched it. Harper leaped from the back seat and then stopped dead, as if the horizon had sucked her bones out. Tess stood, toes at the lip of sand, muscles unreadable. "It's bigger than my head," she said. "I didn't know it would be bigger than my head." "It's bigger than our house," Naomi said. "It's bigger than our company," Elias said, and then laughed at himself. "Everything worth anything is." They walked until the sand found their ankles and decided to keep them. The air tasted like something old and clean. Tess held the shell Dollars had given her in one palm and something that had no shape in the other. "Lei," she said to the wind. The name went out and came back changed. She tried again. "Ren." Her lips pressed around the R and the E like the letters were a new food. She tasted them. She nodded to herself. "Okay." He knelt in the wet sand beside her. He felt ridiculous and young and ancient. "Ren," he said, and the water rushed forward like it had been waiting for its cue. He felt his eyes burn and did not wipe them. The tears made tracks the salt didn't mind. They said the names again. The water came again. It was not absolution because nothing was. It was a rhythm he could count on. Tess tucked the shell into her pocket. She reached into the foam and then into gravity and leaned into a wave and let it push her backward into Elias' chest. He had been braced. He caught her. He did not pick her up. He let her stand in front of him with his hands not restraining but reminding. "You are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone." "Do I belong here?" she asked, not looking at him. He waited for the right part of him to answer. It was not the part that wanted to make grand declarations. It was not the part that wanted to apologize for everything he hadn't done in time. It was the part that had opened a door to a garage and said no in a way that meant yes. The part that had resigned and fallen and found a way to say Ren out loud without breaking. "Yes," he said, "you belong inside." He did not mean his house exactly. He meant his days. He meant the place in a man where grief used to sleep and had been woken gently and asked to make room. He meant the inside of a family that had made itself on purpose. He meant that if there was a garage in this house still, it would be for starting things, not for sleeping in because the world doesn't know where to put you. Years later, the garage would be a room with a long, scarred workbench and a window that let afternoon into everything. Tess would sit there and draw a plan for a playground with a slide that didn't force kids to go fast if they didn't want to. Elias would drink coffee that had learned to be better. Naomi would complain about peas and then put them in everything. Ray would fix the hinge on the pantry that made a noise that had one new person jumping every time they opened it, because sometimes fear is predictably ridiculous. Harper would snooze, as if she had invented the concept and was proud of how it had spread. The world would hurt on schedule. Headlines would make tempests. Men would break things. The inside would be messy and expensive. The door between helping and being helped would swing because doors do that in houses where people live. Some nights, rain would come. It would tell the truth again. It would polish and reveal. Tess would be older. Elias would be older. They would still sometimes go stand in the garage and breathe in the smell of beginnings. And every time before they turned out the light, he would look at her and say, with a gratitude that had learned how to live inside a man, "No, you belong inside." And she would now roll her eyes and bump his hip with hers, a small woman who had once been a small child, and say, "I know." Then she would run upstairs and slam a door and laugh, a sound like waves and lilies and long roads and a life you built because somebody told you no, which was the same as yes, which was the same as a key.